Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, it's Nancy's birthday. Well, her faux birthday. The birthday that Nancy's dad and mom, well, Carson and Nancy's mom gave her. But it's not her real birthday, which also, I'm wondering what she's going to do about her actual birthday. So, for her, she doesn't want to party, especially in a time when she's kind of confused about who she is. Kind of that line between being a Drew and a Hudson is blurred. Obviously, it has been for a while now, and she just kind of feel like she's been losing herself recently. But lo and behold, her birthday gets better because Tamora rolls up and arrests her. Because at first I was like, why are you arresting her now? Like, hasn't enough time, like, maybe they needed the, paperwork to come through or something like that, or maybe it was a last-minute decision. You can tell Tamora didn't want to do it, because he does, he's on better terms with Nancy now, so he does like her, so it's like, I didn't want to do this, but I'm assuming it was the DA, for one, it was because I was like, why'd you pick now to, do this? It seems like it was probably most likely, the DA wanting to, make an example of Nancy, because it's you screwed my case over. It's all this praise she was giving Nancy before, Carson, blah, blah, blah. It's now it's no, you screwed me over, because I guess, going into this, it probably, messed with her career, so she took it personal, so that's what this is about. I mean, I'm sure, legally this would have happened on any other occasion, but it's it feels very personal to go after it, especially now. Like I said, tomorrow, and because it comes up later on that Tamora and the DA were talking about it, but nevertheless, Nancy rolls in. Nancy gets brought to the precinct, and then it's because Tamora's I don't worry, it's a quiet night, and it's nope, a lot of people are here. Whoa, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden, while everything's going down, there's Mitzi there. There's that was he a councilman or whatever. And there's also Brandon, the reporter, who's in Nancy's face. So oh yeah, the liar, of course she paid. It's once again, all the good that Nancy's done, but I guess it's I guess I get it, because but it's also the thing is, that's the effed up thing is no one's giving her the benefit of the doubt, all that she's done in Horseshoe Bay, but I guess this one lie of epic proportions of a ship that was destroyed with 12 people on it. I guess it's kind of all those lives are considered lies, so it's stacks upon stacks. So I guess that kind of outdoes all the good she's done in Horseshoe Bay for years, because it brings into question probably who's to say you're not all that you've done is obviously she got guffed for it last episode as well, but still, it's just, once again, it's just no one's giving her the benefit of the doubt except for the people that are in her life, because they're the ones who know the truth about why she did it. But nevertheless, when it's all said and done, though, something is set in motion, because someone known as the Arbiter basically electrifies the doors and traps them, because this is about a woman's case, a woman named Dolores, who died. Well, something happened to her in 2013 and her body was never found. She was kind of assumed dead. So now it's a situation of finding out what happened to her. And even Nancy being why haven't I heard of this? Obviously she's the local town detective, and it's why wouldn't that should have been front page news? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I know? And it's oh yeah, because the Rose case, because Rose went missing. It's hey, isn't that girl you find him behind the hidden staircase all those years ago? And it's yeah, it's interesting, because that's a storyline that kind of came back around last season, in a sense that that case ultimately was connected to another case last season, and so it's interesting to see that kind of come back. And it turns out because of Rose's case, Dolores has kind of got buried, and then Nick finds a picture of Dolores, is that's kind of why. Little white girl Rosie versus black woman Dolores. It's Dolores never stood a chance. It's kind of Nick's words. And I'm sure on some level, well, it's a multitude of feelings I'm sure Nancy's having, because it's right, basically, it's I'm sure that didn't help either. It's oh, here I am getting all this praise for helping find Rosie, and it's Dolores' whole situation went unanswered all these years. Because I'm sure for her also, because it's that's another thing, it's that was 2013, it's oh, that's the height of my teen detective years, how did I not know about this case? But it kind of got buried. We end up finding out later on, for a particular, obvious reasons, so we'll get into that more later on, but it was an interesting developing case, as we kind of find out everyone that's there is there for a reason, because these are all people kind of connected to the case. They had some interaction with Dolores that night. So first, like, well, for one, Ryan is like, oh, he had a red Porsche or whatever at the time, but he was also arrested for drunk driving. But he's like, I don't think I hit her. But for him, it's like, back then he was drinking a lot. But for him, it's like, I was also, like, at 4, I went to, like, mandatory therapy. It's like, well, what if you skipped this? Like, no, it was mandatory. My dad had, like, my uncle had died of alcoholism. At least we believe so. Just timing and everything like that. Well, I think that already came out that, like, his uncle didn't die like that. His dad didn't that come up about his kill? Well, because like his uncle Josiah like happened to die and every. No, that never came up, but they did bring up the fact is his uncle Josiah ended up dying, and that's why everything got left to his dad, because it was originally supposed to all go to Josiah, but it's like, oh, alcoholic and stuff like that. That might be them setting up the whole thing of like, oh yeah, we already know Everett's willing to kill anyone in his way. Like I said, I feel like that vaguely came up of like him potentially having killed Josiah, but I don't know if that is 100% the case. Like I said, that could just be something they're kind of hinting towards right now. Like I said, I could be reading too much into it. But, you know, Nancy kind of defends him, you know, because at first it was kind of like, oh, you know, and even Ryan apologizing, like, I'm not that person anymore. Like, yeah, he was young, he was going... It had his issues and stuff like that, and it's like, considering his upbringing, it's a thing where it's like, yeah, once again, you look back at season 1, Ryan, you're like, oh, what a scumbag, what a douchebag, with like the way he handled a lot of stuff, he was kind of terrible. But in regards, like, you do kind of see like there is someone good there. It's just a lot of circumstances led him to being the person that he is. So, but trying to tell Nancy like, I'm not that person anymore, but she's like, no, I know. But it's like, there's no way, like, where Dolores was at that bar to where, like, Ryan was going to, like, from his therapy session to when he got arrested. Like, there's no way they would have crossed paths in that direction. So, Ryan is kind of clear on it. But then, obviously, we start filing in about everyone else. Like, Brandon, the reporter, because it turns out, like, oh, he says, like, oh, she was, like, drunk or whatever, and it was just kind of like, I immediately was kind of like, I think that's BS, because he was like, oh, the way she was, the way we saw in the flashback, I felt like it was more like a thing of like, she was like exhausted. It didn't seem drunk, it just seemed like, oh, maybe she was worn out or something like that. So I figured that was probably just his perspective on things. But we find out, oh, it's complicated. He is lying, because it turns out Dolores was an ex. Apparently, he was married at the time, and he was having an affair, and she came to town to end things, and he was kind of grabbing her arm, because she was saying, like, oh, I'm going to, like, tell your wife if you just don't leave me alone, because he was like, I was trying to make her understand. So there's that whole circumstance. Then we also get Mitzi, who's immediately like, oh, I'm a good person. That should have been a key sign of, like, oh, you did something. Like, the fact that you have to proclaim to be a good person, yeah, you're trying too damn hard. And so it turns out, she says, like, oh, like, and she tried to paint Dolores in a bad light, which kind of falls into place certain things later on, but it's a situation where, Mitzi kept being like, okay, like, oh, like, Dolores kind of backed into me, and she was, like, very, like, aggressive and blah, 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 trying to paint Dolores in a bad light. And I tried to handle things the right way, and then she just drove off. We never got a resolution to that. I'm assuming it was the other way around. I'm sure Mitzi was kind of super short with Dolores and was just kind of like blah, 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 and here's my card. Fine, you want to handle things the right way, blah, 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 blah. I think that's kind of what they were hinting at, because it's also like, because it comes up later on, because she said like Dolores like tried to pay her in cash. So I don't know. We never got resolution on that, but that's what I kind of chalked that up to. But, you know, at the same time, Tamura's literally dealing with the fact is like, right, he's got a head injury and from the electric shock and everything, and it's like he's not doing good. Which is also the conversation of like, is there a connection between Nancy and Ryan? Like, why are they so close? And he's like, shouldn't we be focusing on this case that's gone unsolved for 6 years? Which also points to the fact that it's like, oh, it's still 2019 in this show. Once again, it's always interesting when you find out time frames like that. It's like, oh, it's still 2019. Makes sense in the grand scheme of things, because like not too much. Like, season 2 picks up immediately after season 1. There's been some weeks and months in past. But once again, I bring it up. Like, I think I talked about it earlier in the season. Like, when you think about the totality of season 1, like, I think they make it clear, like, season 1 took place over, like, maybe the course of, like, a couple months at most, like, maybe 3 or something like that, maybe even, like, 1 or 2. It's actually a short frame of time of the entire season. Once again, I'm a nut for finding out the time frame of, like, when a series takes place, because it's always interesting to be like, wow, this whole thing went down in, like, maybe, like, a month or something. You know, it's always interesting like that. But regardless, focusing back on things, for Nick, it's like, this woman didn't get justice, you know, plenty of black people in general, but in particular black women, like their stories don't get told. Like they kind of fall under the rug. They get so many of their crimes some of the crimes committed to them like go unreported. So it's like the very least, it's like, because it's like no one did anything for him. Tomorrow's like, I wasn't here then, and the Nick's like, but you're here now, so let's get justice for her. So, but kind of circling back, we find out Mitzi's a damn liar, because it turns out she actually reported Dolores for saying like, oh yeah, the fact is that she potentially was a drug dealer and stuff like that. She was like, what? No, I said possible drug dealer. It's like, wait, is that supposed to make it better? It's like, because she had the cash on her, because she was black, she just assumed. It's like, oh, Mitzi's super racist. It's like, oh, and she wants to try to be like, I am not racist. It's like, okay. And that's what I'm saying, like proclaiming she, like, and once again, that's also the interesting thing about this episode too, because it's like, well, everyone else is there for a particular reason, because everyone played a role in what went down. Like, so we ultimately end up finding out, well, side note, at the same time all this is happening, Carson shows up and Nancy like yells at him. I was like, oh, you're just trying to scare him away. But also like the look on Carson's face, I was like, no, she didn't just try to scare you away. She gave you a key sign. And it's like, right, he goes to at the time, because of everything that goes on the other side of this story, in this episode, he goes to Bess and George for help. And it's like, I was hoping we'd get Ace to kind of hack into stuff, but man, who needs Ace? It's like, we're going to take these rubber mats, we won't have to wear, because I actually thought it was really interesting too. It's like, okay, like she brought up the Goldilocks story, so it's like, okay, like what's about to happen right now? It's like, listen to me, and to basically listen to every third word, because Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the third bed was just right. And then it was like, oh, that's kind of, George being like, oh, that's a nice thing that you two have. And it's like, okay. And obviously this like relates to a case that she dealt with years ago, which I think that's also, I wonder, did Carson like remember that case off the top of his head? Does he remember like every case Nancy did, or did he have to like kind of go back through his notes or something? We didn't see that, but I'm curious to know that. I mean, it doesn't matter either way, but it's kind of interesting to note, like, if he remembered that off the top of his head, because it's like, oh yeah, he's proud of like all of Nancy's achievements, so like he remembers everything she's ever done. So there's that avenue today. And so he was like, okay, and if this doesn't work, we could just scale the building and find like a trap door to kind of get in. And then like Bess and George like, hey, scale the building? It's like, his daughter's in danger. So it's like, yeah, we'll scale the building like it's nothing. I was like, really? Sadly, their attempt to get inside didn't work. But basically, all this information kind of comes out, so like, obviously, like, the councilman or whatever, who, interestingly enough, is the actor who played John in Van Helsing. Once again, because the actress who played Doc was in this as well, so it's just interesting. Like, once again, it's like, just seeing, because they have to be, I'm curious, they have to be, like, Canadian actors. I'm wondering if it's, I mean, I'm sure, like, a lot of CW stuff is filmed in Vancouver, but it's like, I'm sure they must use, like, a lot of Canadian actors and stuff like that for a lot of CW stuff to a certain extent, so I chalk that up to that, but I don't know. I just think it's so fascinating. In the long run, just stuff like that. It's just interesting. Just considering who John was character-wise, it's just kind of interesting. But oh god, I'm going on a whole tangent, and I kind of lost my place for a little bit. Sorry. Basically, that he used to be a cop, and he talked about working Dolores' case, and like he's like, yeah, like Mitzi's like racism. Like, I found Dolores, and I found out what she said wasn't true, so I let her go. Should have figured that wasn't the whole story. And once again, Mitzi be like, I'm not a racist, blah 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 blah. But then also like the Detective Hampton looks a little suspicious, because it's also this might have come up after the fact, but obviously they need to get Tamora out, so it's like, okay, they made sure to get her out, but Nick ended up finding out something. It's like, right, there was an earring of hers, and it's like, we've seen that, we both have, and so Nancy keeps them in there, and it's like, I'm the arbiter now, which even like Hampton was like, whoa, you're an accessory and stuff like that, but Nancy's like, go ahead, arrest me. Kind of already was arrested during all this anyway, but it turns out, like, we find out, like, because Tamora was able to contact, being like, yeah, like, because it turns out Dolores was arrested that night, and it's like, well, why was she arrested? Like, and why just, because it says that, like, Ryan was released at 8, but he was like, 8 in the morning, he was like, no, that's not possible. Like, I was released at, like, midnight or something, because no buses were running, and my car had been impounded, so I walked. I vividly remember that. But he also said he heard some pipes and stuff like that moaning, but it was like, no, what he heard was Dolores crying, because the councilman had went back when he was a cop, he arrested her, and like she had a head injury from him slamming her head into like either against the hood of the car when he was putting her in the car. And he was like, it was an accident. He's yelling at Hampton, but it turns out they covered up stuff. That's what this was about, because Hampton was the guard on duty at the time. And so and then Hampton's like, I have the dash cam footage, even though basically they covered up Dolores's murder. Like, it was a situation where basically she died from a seizure, and she died in front of them, and like they covered up, they threw her body, they threw her, they drove her car into the ravine, then they also threw her body in the ocean, so... And so that's the sad truth of this. And that ends up being a thing where Nancy breaks down the fact is every one of them played a role in this. Brandon, Mitzi, the other cop, Hampton, everyone played a role. Like, you two might have killed her, but everyone played a role. Like, you threatened her. You humiliated her. You assaulted her, and you let her die. You ignored her or something of that nature. So it was like... damn, like, so they're all kind of guilty in their own right, but it seems like obviously those two cops are, the ones kind of suffering the most from it. And even later on, Tamora saying, like, what happened to Dolores was because of, racism and abuse of power, and it's like, he's going to do everything he can to, like, change that, like, it's going to be a long road, but doing everything he can to make things right. It's like, because I'm sure he listened to what Nick said, and it's like, I'm here now, so it's up to me to kind of make things right, so a situation like Dolores's doesn't happen again, that she was able to get justice, so that was an interesting development. And at the end of it, even Ryan saying this line from her being like, I'm proud of you, he's like, she's like, I just had to get, justice for it, and he's like, yep, 12 more to go. Because that was also a thing for Nancy. It's like she feels like she failed everyone on that ship. 12 people that Everett killed because she recanted her statement. So it's like, I couldn't get justice for them. At the bare minimum, I need to get justice for this one woman who's gone on, unnoticed and unheard. Like, her story going unheard. And then Nancy confronts the Reverend later on. I'm not surprised. I figured from the beginning she had to be the one behind this, because lo and behold, who was the first person to leave before shit went down? The Reverend was there. She's the only one that was there first before everything. So it's like, I figured as much. So it turns out the reason why is because she would give like prayers at like the jail and stuff like that. She'd be like the go-to person for that type of stuff. And so I just thought about that. Am I God, I'm so stupid. I'm going to go on a huge tangent. I'm going to circle back, but it's just something that clicked in my head. I didn't realize that the actress who played Kramer on The Flash is Hannah from Nancy Drew. Didn't click in my head till just now. I was like, wait, that's the same actress, isn't it? Because I just thought about Hannah. Like, she popped in my head. I was like, oh, that's the same actress. I never noticed that. Once again, CW shows, like, some actors kind of bounce between shows to a certain extent. It's always interesting. It's like, I just didn't realize it till now. I was like, took me all this time to notice that. That was interesting. Regardless, tangents and all that aside, going back to my main point, basically, the Reverend, she found, like, the earring, and obviously they tried to be like, that's from, like, someone else claimed it, blah, 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 blah. But I'm doing that a lot, sorry. But the Reverend, like, has been praying the entire time. Like, she knew something was up, and so she was praying the entire time, like, hoping that Dolores would get justice. And what set this in motion is last week, Dolores' mom died. Dolores has spent so much time, she'd always go to the Reverend praying for someone to get justice for, that's what it was kind of about. That Dolores' mom would come in so often, looking for justice, and she died last week, and so that's what set it in motion that the Reverend wanted to get justice for Dolores, because no one else was around to, speak up about it. Like, now that her mom was gone, because that's, I guess, the last family that was left. And so, when that was all said and done, Nancy admits, like, no, I didn't tell the cops about you or anything like that, So it's like, Tamora is okay at the end of the day. He's going through surgery, but he's okay. Like, no one got seriously hurt other than Tamora, but that's good. So it's about Nancy's not gonna, it's like, I guess we're just kind of, the arbiter just kind of slipped away. It was interesting too, because Nancy also picked up the fact is, it's like, right, like, she's like, oh yeah, like, well, you were talking, like, I heard a slight bell chiming. It was like on the hour, like, from a church or whatever. So she knew, like, there were, like, pieces. So, like, she had known that the Reverend's, like, name was there, like, on someone who was there that, or, like, who visited, who's, like, on the sheet of, like, people who come to the station and stuff like that. So clues led her to figuring out who the arbiter was, but she didn't tell anyone. But obviously, like, the Reverend's talking about the fact is of like, yeah, you recanting about your statements, like, that doesn't sound like you. And so for Nancy, it's like, I've been kind of struggling with who I am lately. But it basically is a conversation about kind of good fruit being born from the tree or bad fruit being born from a corrupted tree, saying that basically it's our actions kind of state what they say about us. Who we are, and it's like, what are your actions going to say about you? Something of that nature. And so that's a big part of Nancy's story at the end of this, is obviously everyone's gathered to celebrate her birthday, but for her, it's just kind of like, it's just a reminder, especially when, like, they find out, like, why her birthday is what it is. Like, Nancy's mom was obsessed with Abraham Lincoln, even naming Nancy after Lincoln's mother. And it's like, a part of, like, his speech was, I think is when he gave the Gettysburg Address, and it was like, our better angels, and it was like, that's what Nancy was, our better angels. And so, and that makes her feel, like, guilty, because it's like, damn, there's so many people not getting justice because of me. Yes, I had reasons to protect Ace, but it's still, like, she feels guilty about it. I think also, like, kind of seeing Celia in a different light probably made her kind of, like, all that's just kind of rubbing her the wrong way. So, she tears down all those newspaper articles, and in her journal she writes, Everett Hudson, jail, but, like, she scratches out injustice. I don't think she's going to go like, oh, I'm going to get full-blown revenge and you're going to die. I think it's going to be what Ryan was worried about from the beginning. It's like, what's Nancy going to do? Oh, she's going to burn that empire to the ground. I think that's what she's going to do. She's going to go, like, do whatever is necessary to get justice for those people. And it's like, this whole conversation about justice, like, who she wants to be. I want to be on the right side of things. I'm not going to, like, She had claimed, like, she was going to be an insider to helping take down Everett, but I think this reinvigorated that fire of, like, this is who I am. I'm someone that gets justice for people. I'm going to help people. So I think that's, well, once again, hopefully she doesn't turn full-blown avenging angel. I don't see that, but that is a possibility considering who Everett is. So, I mean, he's also the reason why what ended up happening to her biological mom ended up happening. So it's kind of like, kind of getting justice for Lucy and her own, because Lucy kind of had no one to turn to under those circumstances. So it's just kind of an interesting thought, so that's where they're setting that up. Another side of things is George, Ace, and Bess working on trying to track down Mary Clark's ghost for Odette. And so they need to, like, contact the spiritual world. And so George ends up using this Mahjong board. And for her, it's like, yeah, there's been plenty of people in her family who've lost had lost money to other people in that family. So it's like, yeah, this is going to be their totem. And they activate it, to contact one of her ancestors to, try and find Mary Clark's ghost. And Ace gets possessed. And it's by her. It's like, oh, of course, Aunt May. It could have been any one of my ancestors, and it just had to be Aunt May, because, like, her Aunt May is the one who kind of judges her the most, and it's like, yep, yay. And it's like the whole thing of, like, why possess Ace? It's like, I don't know. I was always curious what it was like to be a tall white man, and it's like, well, I found out this was my opportunity, so that was interesting. Also, like, the whole thing with, like, oh, bring me my glasses. It's like, oh, do you need your glasses to see her? It's like, no, it's just, like, it makes me feel like me again. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. But also, like, it's like also a little bit of a cute thing between her and George. And it's like, she puts the glasses on her aunt, and it's like, oh, and they say it at the same time, oh, I see you now. It was like a cute bit between them. But her aunt was always a little judgy towards her, at least that's how, George's perspective. But it's also, like, for her, like, because her aunt, like, her name, like, was her, like, Zhilong, like, there's a kind of, not necessarily inside joke, it was kind of like an effed up name. It's like, little lazy is what it actually translates to, and it's like anytime I wasn't motivating enough or working kind of hard enough, like, that would be what she'd call me. It's meant to be motivation, and Bess being like, that's not really a motivating name. But they kind of get into, some stuff, because it was like, I found your glasses in the Lost and Found. It's like, oh, what else did you find? Ambition? A husband? A future? And her just being like, I walked right into that one. But nevertheless, basically she kind of passes out for a little bit, but then comes back and is like, okay, so I searched the spiritual world. Like I whispered to some people to find out some information about Mary Clark. Mary Clark's not a ghost. She actually moved on because yes, she grieved Odette, but the fact is she eventually healed and she moved on. She lived a life. She found love again, and she, died being surrounded by family, so she had no regrets, so she has no ties to this world. Which Odette is kind of like, no, that's not true. Mary loved me. She would have never, I don't think Aunt May was lying about that. I think that was her being truthful about it, which Mary's not going to appreciate that, which is like, well, she was kind of a vengeful ghost for many different reasons, but it is also a thing of for her, it's like her one thing that she held on to. I'm sure that's actually going to turn sadly to resentment, because I'm sure she's going to start resenting Mary now, because it's like, wait, you left me behind? You fell in love again? I never moved on from you. But, and I can understand that to an extent. I've been in that circumstances. It took me a long time to get over, one particular ex. Nothing, not on her fault. It's just me. I made a lot of mistakes that would have helped me heal faster, but I didn't. So it's a circumstance where I can kind of get the whole thing of oh yeah, having trouble moving on when someone else does, so I get that, but I think, but I also kind of understand that too, how that, oh, wait, you moved on, finding out the person you love moved on, it's and you're still holding out for them, and it's it turns into bitterness and resentment to a certain extent. Once again, I felt that, so that's why I think, that's definitely when we were going to turn with Mary's story, but especially because her Aunt May was it's oh, I've looked everywhere, I found about, how good you've been raising your sisters, because another thing is her aunt wanted her to be out of Horseshoe Bay, because she also, didn't want her to stick around, because it's I don't want you to end up like your mom, but also, in the grand scheme of things, she ended up kind of laying out the fact is but you're a co-owner of this business. The fact of the matter is what you've been doing with your sisters, Ted's class president. It's you're doing such a good job. It's even though I never told you how proud I am of you, I am proud of you. I always have been, And so it's also a conversation of well, let me see your hand. And it's all right, my palms haven't changed. And it's yes, they have. Your lifelines. It's it said that you're going to have kind of a rocky start, but you're going to have a healthy and long life. But Odette is violent and brief, and that's going to make your life shorter. So it's you need to untangle yourself from Odette before things go sideways. So, and obviously her Aunt May hugs her, and they're hugging and having this moment, and then Ace comes back. He's okay, don't take this the wrong way, but you can stop hugging me if you want to, because he knows how George is, and it's oh, I'm not your Aunt May anymore, so you might want to stop hugging me, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And I was oh, that's it. But it's but I heard everything that your Aunt May said about Odette, and it's well, don't tell anyone. And it's but he was but it's but for her it's I don't want to ruin Nancy's birthday, it's just because she doesn't want everyone to worry about what this means, because staying tied to Odette, her being the vengeful spirit that she kind of might turn it back into to a certain extent, might burn up George's life. And even her aunt being I don't want to see you until you're an old lady like me, because she is because she understands where Mary was coming from. Because despite everything, because George was I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were sick, I just didn't want to see you like that. I want to have my final memories of you to be more happy, and which I can understand. I've lost grandparents who were sick, and I didn't see them in those final times to a certain extent. God, that's a little depressing. Regardless, God. I kind of threw myself off with that. Like I said, just kind of got me thinking about some stuff that was kind of family stuff. Kind of got me a little depressed thinking about that like that. Regardless, but it was it's no, but I like Mary. She was I died happy and surrounded by family, knowing that you guys loved me. I thought that was sweet. But yeah, there's also an element of obviously I'm curious to just see where that goes. How that whole Odette thing plays out, because she is not a happy camper. She is in love with Bess, and I'm curious if that's going to turn into a whirlwind situation in a bad way, in a sense of right, things aren't going to be all hunky dory, because well, to be fair, she kind of has moved on in her own extent because she's found love with Bess, but it's also a complicated thing that I don't think that's going to work out the way either one of them kind of wants it to, and I think that's going to lead to some terrible times for George upcoming. We'll ultimately have to wait and see, but I'm really interested to see kind of how all of this ultimately plays out going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and Goodbye.